Did you hear that?
I did.
Okay. Matt, thanks for doing this. Will you spell your name for me?
Matt, last name Jerr.
Perfect. You'd be surprised how I've messed that up. So, Jim, Jim.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's my name has gotten butchered so many times. I'm good with it.
uh, are you okay with us using this recording publicly?
I am.
Is there anyone in your story, you or anyone in your story, face legal prosecution or get into trouble for anything you share?
No, I don't think so.
Um, okay, I'm going to hit mute. You can identify however you want, and the floor is yours.
All right. All right. Hey, I'm Matt. I'm an alcoholic. I want to share a little bit about my story. I don't think it's probably much different when you hear it than your story. Pick up the things that you identify with. Don't compare to my story. I come from a very long line of alcoholics. As far as I know, I'm the only person who has found recovery. So backing up a bit, my father drank about a gallon of Gallo a day. We found this out afterwards. He was physically abusive to my mother. So my mother left him. I have very few memories of him. I have memories of my parents fighting. That's it. I remember getting on the table. I must have been 2 or 3 and trying to separate them. But that's the thing that I remember about him, and that he physically abused my mother. We had a house when we lived with my father, and then we moved to the second floor of a 2-family home with my uncle, and we were destitute. I remember it being normal going up to the counter, I think it was at a Sears, and getting food stamps. So we were living on food stamps. My mom didn't work. I was dirt poor. It was a great day when we had London broil, although she had her own issues with alcohol. I don't know if I want to call her an alcoholic, but I definitely want to say that there were challenges with that. I'm an only child. I don't have any siblings. And even from a young age, I thought about being alone all the time. Man, I was an isolator from a young age. My mom got me encyclopedias, and I read the encyclopedia by myself on the floor because I would sit there and isolate. There's somebody who ended up working for me years later who was the first person I ever heard of who did the same thing. So if I could monetize the useless knowledge I have from isolating, I would be a billionaire. But there is nothing that you can learn from knowing the middle names of every president of the United States. But that's what I did as a kid. We eventually moved to a better town. We moved to a town where they had a great school system, because where I was growing up, it was not going to be a good experience for me going into that high school. So my mom moved us. Wealthy town, but we lived in an apartment in the poorer end of town. And again, didn't have a dad, didn't have siblings, didn't own our own home. I stuck out like a sore thumb, and I was not the popular kid for that whole time. I was picked on, I was bullied. It was a rough go when we moved. Yeah, I got a better education, but it was a very rough go. Another guy came into the picture from my mom, my stepfather. He definitely had a pretty bad drinking problem. So I saw the way alcohol was drunk. I have to tell you, there's yes, I know there's a lot of theory of alcoholism and the allergy that is hereditary. I saw the way I drank being a repeat of what the people around me did. I see a lot of, you view it, you're going to do it the same way. That was definitely my story. I remember the first time in a meeting I mentioned something like that. Somebody shook their head and they got kind of testy, and we talked about it afterwards, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I guess you're kind of right with that." Because I have some issues about the genetic component, but I have changed my views. So went through high school. I found out my biological father was an alcoholic. I guess I'll back up a bit. I haven't seen my biological dad since Christmas Day of 1982. He skedoodled at that point. I had no concept of what a father was. He passed away a couple of years ago, and to my surprise, I had this incredible sadness. He never stopped drinking, and he seemed completely resigned to his fate. I talked to his second wife after the fact because we had to settle up his affairs, and I didn't want to drive to another state to get it. And I figured, you have dealt with a lot of stuff. Just just take whatever's there. Most of the stuff was directed towards you. You had more of a relationship. Take the stuff. There's nothing there for me. I'm not driving down to Jersey. I can tell that there is a feeling in some people that they don't deserve recovery. And I think he's one of those people. I could stop, I could find recovery, but I don't deserve it, damn it. So I'm not going to. I don't know if that's an excuse or guilt or all of the above. He felt that way. I sure as hell don't. I remember starting alcohol in high school, the whole let's pool our money together. Let's find a homeless guy or somebody standing outside the liquor store in the city, and they'll go in and get us what they can get. And I remember early on, I remember the thing that made me feel good about turning 21 is I had control over what I was going to be able to drink, because I didn't know what they were going to walk out with. They're going to walk out with Jack Daniels. They're going to walk out with Private Stock. They're going to go walk out with Crazy Horse. And whatever it is, if I wanted to get drunk, I was going to drink it. I should back up a little bit, because I'm remembering this comes up from time to time when I tell my story, that a friend of mine mentioned, I think we were like 13 or 14. He mentioned that you can get high from smelling rubber cement, and you could go get it at Toys R Us. And like 12, 13, 14, I heard that and thought, that's a great idea. I had never gotten high at that point, but I remember that and thinking I would want to do that. I never did. For whatever reason, we never followed through. But I believe that I had a problem even before drinking, because if your opinion is anything other than, hey, do you want to go get some rubber cement, huff it, and get high, and not, you are fucking crazy, you have a problem. Because my view is, that's a great idea. Let's go try it, because we can get our hands on it. It's at Toys R Us. It can't possibly be a bad thing. So it took until about 16 to get my first drink. It was a 40 of Budweiser. And I don't really remember being drunk. It was sort of like I couldn't find the feeling, but after a couple times of drinking, I did find the feeling. And I remember in my teens thinking, seeing an empty bottle of booze somewhere, why would anybody drink one beer? You don't get anything out of just one beer. You might as well not even drink. So at 16 or 17, whether I knew it or not, I had a problem. I had a problem as soon as I was able to connect with that drunken feeling. And that continued through college, and it continued through some of adulthood. I got into trouble real fast in college because I'm on my own. I can get all the alcohol I want. I pledged a fraternity, and it was one pledge. It was a pledge night. So the pledges went out and we partied, and somebody made me drink a lot, but they gave me like 6 shots of 151. And I was in a place that I wasn't going to say no to anybody else, because it was important to be a people pleaser. It was important for me to please you. And the next thing I knew, I was waking up in a hospital, and I knew exactly what had happened. I didn't remember a damn thing, but I knew I had drinking too much. And I ended up having to be hauled into the dean's office, and I had to call my mom and tell her this. This was not a good situation, and I talked my way out of it. I almost failed out of school. And then my willpower kicked in, and I decided I don't want to be that guy failing out of school. I saw the people around me in the academic probation meeting, and I'm like, you people are not like me. I'm better than you. And ended up getting 3.5 the rest of the way. And I was able to control my drinking to a point. I developed my rules. There were some nights you don't drink. On the weekends when you don't have school, you drink. And it was the same thing when I went to work. I became a traffic reporter in the state that I live in, which is about as unglamorous as possible. I think on the celebrity ladder, you're just above the circus. Didn't make much money. The hours were awful. You wake up at 4 a.m, you do a split shift, and I'm an introvert by nature. So it can be hard for me to make friends. And a lot of it is, I believe that the people around me are not going to like me. If you find out who I really am, you're not going to like me. You're not going to like what's inside the guts here. So I drank alone. And one of the reasons I drank alone is, if you saw me over drink, you would call me an alcoholic. And the worst thing that anybody could possibly do is call me an alcoholic. I was not going to be like my father. As a matter of fact, I knew how to control my drinking so I wouldn't go over the alcoholic line. Here's what I didn't know until I found recovery. When you're thinking that way, and you're thinking of, I see the line, can't go over the line, I'll control it this way, you're already over the line. Man, I used to do online tests to see if I'm an alcoholic, online test after online test after online test. And I would try every single way not to fail the test. And I'd fail the test every time. Also found out in recovery from some of the old timers that sober people don't take those online tests. The only people who ever take an online test is somebody who already has a problem. So I think question number one should be, if you're thinking of taking this test, I think you have a problem. I didn't realize that because I had crappy thinking, but this was always in the back of my head. I had periods of time of being abstinent. So 10 months or so, and it felt like I was holding my breath or I had to pee and I'm crossing my legs so I don't pee. It's sort of like I'm waiting this out, but I didn't have a program. I didn't have something that I was doing, and I was constantly complaining about being sober. I didn't like being sober. I hadn't replaced alcohol with anything else. So it was just constantly being bummed when I go to a party and see other people drink. My girlfriend at the time broke up with me, and that was it for sobriety. I was off and running at that point. And that lasted until I finally got sober. So I ended up getting married. I got out of the traffic reporting business and got a real job and started making some real money. And we bought a house. We had our son. And all this time, nobody was telling me I had a problem. But I'll tell you what it was like when I went out to dinner and had a beer, or to the bar, that maybe I would think about, should I have a beer? Should I not have a beer? Will I be able to drive? Will I be able to stop? Okay, I'm having a beer. Can I have just one? Maybe I can have just one, but I really want two. But if I have two, I'm going to get sloppy. And there was this running dialogue in my head. I never got a DUI. I never lost a job because of alcohol, at least not directly because of alcohol. But all of those things, I wasn't homeless. I wasn't a bum. But here's what I was doing. When I did drink, I sure as hell wanted to drink a hell of a lot more alcohol, but I knew I couldn't. So I was miserable there. And I never realized, why is it that I cannot drink alcohol when I'm not drinking? But as soon as I have my first drink, why is it incredibly impossible to stop? I also surrounded myself with people who drank more than me. That's a great trick to try. Drink with people who drink more than you, because then you can point your finger at them and say, you have a problem. I don't have a problem. Well, I was drinking alone because you didn't point your finger at me and say I'm an alcoholic when you're drinking alone, because nobody can see it. So I hid it. I found some tricks at the end. Get boxed wine. You can just casually go up and top off your glass, and you've only had one or two all night because your glass never went down. Now, I was probably drinking whole bottles at that point, but I learned, we're sneaky kind of people. I learned that you can just casually go over and fill up and nobody's going to notice. If you don't act sneaky and you do the act in public with sort of no shame, nobody picks up on it. And that's what I learned towards the end. I was watching a TV show called Switched at Birth. My wife likes this show. It's one of those family shows. And one of the main characters was in recovery, and she slipped, and she had a boyfriend, owned a bar, gave her a drink. And the look on her face was one of, this is not too smart. And then the alcohol passed her lips and everything on her face changed. And seeing that, I saw, God damn it, I got a problem. And my problem is not just with alcohol, it's with everything. If I want to stop drinking, I got to change everything in my life. And it's the first time I thought that way. My last drink was 2 days after my second daughter was born. I got 3 kids. That was on March 21st, 2014. I have not had a drink since. Now, I had a few months when I wasn't quite sure what to do. And there were times that I thought of driving into the package store, and then I drove out thinking, I don't have enough money. I had this grace period where I just wasn't drinking. And then I saw that show, and then I talked to my therapist. And I didn't want to ask my therapist, do I have a problem? Because he was going to say one of two things. Both of them were unacceptable. One, yes, I think you have a problem. Didn't want to hear that. Or two, no, you don't have a problem. You're being silly. And then I feel silly. What he said was neither of those things. He asked me some questions, and then he said, well, why don't you go to a meeting? It never occurred to me to go to an AA meeting, because in my mind, an AA meeting is where a bunch of old homeless men in trench coats and probably nothing underneath sit in an unfinished basement with an incandescent light bulb spinning around where hope is lost. And I didn't want to go where hope was lost. And he said, "Why don't you just go? There's no commitment. Just go sit. If you identify, you identify. If not, not. First 9 meetings you go to are going to be really uncomfortable, but just keep going and see what you think." So that's what I did. I had to have a conversation with my wife. I think I have a problem. She told me, "I don't think you had a chance. You have so much family history, so many problems in your family, that this was going to happen." So I went to my first meeting, and I went in a button-down shirt, and I went in khakis and nice dress shoes, because when I work, you dress up to go to meetings. So I was way overdressed. This was a beginner's meeting because I thought, well, there's a structure to this, that maybe there's like a little desk that you sign in at, and they teach you how to be a good member of Alcoholics Anonymous and walk you through, and eventually graduate to the next meeting. That's not what it was. It was one of these meetings that was near a bunch of sober houses, which made it convenient to have a beginner's meeting. Total shit show. This was people who could not stay sober to save their lives, constantly relapsing. And I looked around, I'm like, damn, I cannot relate to this at all. But they gave me my first big book, and they were super kind to me. They pulled me aside. They talked to me. They were very welcoming. This was not a group of people that I at the time looked and said I have anything in common, but they were nice to me. And nobody ever is forward nice to me. So I went to that meeting a couple times, but what really stuck was a men's meeting that I went to, where the guy, old guy. So I went in, it was funny. That first meeting is in this very large church, and I went in through the wrong exit, and I had to cross through like the gymnasium where kids are playing. And then I heard people talking. So I jumped into that room, but it was a Boy Scout meeting. And I didn't know what to say of like, oh, hey kids, you know where the AA meeting is? So I just kind of walked out, and I followed where I heard more voices, and there were people. Well, I wasn't sure it was an AA meeting because people were having fun. They were milling about. They were drinking coffee. They were laughing. There were a whole bunch. It seemed like almost like a church meeting that they're getting ready for. But no, I found the right place. And the guy up front had something like 35, 40 years sober. And he said, he started the meeting by saying, you know, I could have a beer. I could have 2 beers. And I didn't drink every day. But when I put alcohol in my body, I was miserable. And I'm like, ding, ding, ding. I have finally found something that I can identify with. And I kept going to that meeting, and I would follow around people who I admired and go to those meetings. Because I was shy, something I heard was do service work. Hey, be a greeter, make coffee. You're going to meet people that way. So I became a greeter at a meeting and met everybody within the span of a month. I got into the big thing for me in recovery has been service work. I have been an alternate GSR. I've been a regular GSR. I was the treasurer for 4 years of my 2-year term. And it's something that I've just recently given up. If you are in recovery and you're not doing service, you're doing yourself a great disservice because you're not having fun like you could. I had such meaning and purpose being the treasurer. And the only reason I gave it up is one of the people in my home group who was the group treasurer got sick and he couldn't do it anymore. So I'm like, I'm going to give up my treasurer role at the district level. I'm going to take this one because that's my higher power coming in telling me, change it up. They need you more. And I thought it would be easier. I got to tell you, being group treasurer, it's harder because it's not as organized as I had it at the district level. So I'm working on that. I have gotten to know a crew of people who keep me sober. I will say, regardless of how you got sober, recovery, AA, Instagram, whatever the hell you call it, have a group of people who are sober as well that you can say anything to. Here's the beauty of my opinion. I'm not speaking for AA. I'm not speaking for any 12-step program. This is my opinion. The thing that got me sober and keeps me sober is I found a bunch of people I can identify with in my 12-step group and can be vulnerable with. I have a group of people who could call me and tell me anything, and me the same way. You have to be like that you can find at least one person that you can tell anything to, because you've got to offload that stuff to stay sober. The thing between now being 8 years sober and 10 months dry before was I've replaced the alcohol with something else. I've replaced it with whatever you want to call it, higher power, purpose, service work, all of that stuff. So alcohol is no longer the solution to my problem. That was the problem for me. Yes, I had an alcohol problem, but alcohol was the solution to my problems, the Band-Aid. Now it has been replaced and there's no room for alcohol. Here's the issue. If I stop doing what I'm doing, I could go back out tomorrow. And I'm scared as hell of that. I don't want to start drinking again. I've forgotten what a hangover looks like, but the hangover is not the thing that keeps me from not drinking. And there have been times where I've had stress or stuff coming up where I've had to pick up the phone. Recently, right now, I've got some issues with my house. I have some issues getting insurance money and getting a loan and dealing with a contractor. And then my dog got really sick. My lawnmower broke. There's a whole bunch of things that each one is not a problem, but sandwiched on top of each other, they are stressing. And this has caused lesser people to drink. I didn't. I picked up my meetings. I started doing more service work. I pick up the phone and talk to people. I talk to my wife, talk to my friends. And that is the thing that keeps me sober. I have these bad things that happen to me and alcohol doesn't enter the picture. Now, I have destructive habits at that point, but alcohol is not part of the picture. And the other thing that I look at in sobriety is lower the bar on what success is. Oh, I'm not making as much money as people I know. I haven't built the title of people I graduated college from. All right, but do I know what their happiness level is? My son told me about this girl who was bullying him, this girl who is about, I don't know, she's not 5 feet tall, but yeah, maybe she's like 4 feet, 5 feet. She's probably a quarter of his weight because he's super, super tall. And she's bullying him and he's handling it the right way. And I told him, all these manipulations that she has, that she's doing, I want you to think about how miserable she is. This is your victory and you have no control. That's another thing about recovery is I teach people AA stuff without them knowing it's AA stuff. My people at work, they get so angry at me because I say, what can you control? What can you control in this situation? Can you control this? Let's focus on what you can control. Yeah, we're not getting paid enough. Okay. Is our pay something you can control? Are there incentives you can get? Yes. Why are you not taking advantage of the incentives if you're worried about getting paid? Things like that. So I originally got into recovery for my family, but that was bullshit. I should have gotten in it for me. So I stay in it for me and I stay sober for me because I'm not going to be a good husband. I'm not going to be a good father. I'm not going to be a good member of my community. And I like the fact that I have to hold myself to a higher standard than other people. Other people who are not drunks, at least as far as I know, can go around being jackasses. I can't, because if I behave like a jackass, I'll get guilty and I'll drink. And this leads to a better life. And I think about what is the purpose of what we do? Is it to touch somebody else's life and weave the fabric of the things that you should be to make other people's lives better? Yeah. And you can do that if you get sober and get sober the right way. I look different than you might look. I might be a different skin color, different sexual orientation. But when you really get into the 12 steps, it doesn't matter because you learn that no matter what you see on the outside, the insides are messed up and are focus and have an allergy that stops you from drinking. That's all that matters. And it cuts through the color and the size and what people look like and act like. And we're a lot the same. And I talk to people who I never thought I would talk to and call people friends, who I never thought I would call friends, because we have that one commonality, and that one commonality is the only thing that matters. I had a podcast 3 or 4 years ago. It was a fan show. And I put a lot of effort in, and I stepped away from going to as many meetings, and I realized I wasn't as happy afterwards. And I was a fan of this show that we had a falling out over. And then I had all this equipment. And it was always in the back of my mind that I wanted to do a recovery show. So I started one. I ended up getting a couple of my friends together. It's called the Sober Friends Podcast. You can find it at soberfriendspod.com. I'm on Instagram. at Sober Friends Pod. And I just started it because, like, you know what? It's COVID. We have people who can't find meetings. Let me get the word out. I'm going to tell you that in starting this podcast, I don't know if I've helped one person, but I helped me. I feel a lot better because I have these two other guys with me talking about a topic or having a guest on that I am served with another meeting during the week. I consider the time that I sit with my guys and record this show to be a meeting. So I found one way to get another meeting in. And every once in a while, somebody will reach out and say, God damn, you've helped me with this. And I'm baffled by that people listen to this and they find it helpful. And that is the biggest reward, because I'll sit there and I'll obsess over downloads. And then somebody will slap me in the face and say, you're not doing it for that purpose. And then somebody will reach out and say, you're helping me. And I'm like, okay, set me straight. But I got to keep doing the right things because I've got a built-in forgetter. So that's my story. It's been, I realized early on, at first I thought I was really screwed up and that's messed up. And then I realized, thank God I got screwed up and became an alcoholic, because now, one, I know what my problem is, and two, I know what the solution is, and I can be a better person. And it gives me the excuse, if nothing else, to be a better person. Thanks for listening to my story, everyone.